Okay everyone, today we are working on some marker and or ink illustration techniques. Some of the tools we're going to be using are markers like these, and then just a ballpoint pen is considered ink. Same thing with any sort of like nice high-end drawing pen that you would get, but what we're doing is just going to be using a plain ballpoint pen for some of them. And so these are the tools that we're going to be working with today. The first thing we're going to start out with is hatching. So hatching is comprised of a bunch of lines that all go in the same direction, right? And so as long as they go in the same direction, you have hatching. If they cross each other, they're cross hatching. Now, something that's important about that is each set of lines going in one direction, you want to be fairly parallel. Otherwise, they're going to look really messy. Okay, and then we'll get into stippling in a minute. So real quick, when you're doing hatching, one of the things that you want to do is you want to focus on moving your entire arm, not your wrist. So if I'm over here doing hatching and I move my wrist, you can see that my movements create lines that are not straight, they are curved. And so if we want really sharp, clean, smooth lines, the way that we do that is we keep our wrist really stiff and you move your whole arm from the elbow and you don't move your hand at all. And so doing the same thing but not moving my wrist gives me really straight lines. So one of the things I think about that helps me is I think about squeezing my pen and keeping my wrist totally stiff, almost like I imagine that there's a straight line right here that goes from my wrist down my arm that can't be moved. Okay, and so you're going to work on practicing some regular hatching on scratch paper, and I'm going to do it with all my pens just to see the difference in them. So this is a ultra fine point Sharpie. These are known for making a little dot, like a little mark. So I tend not to use these for hatching. And sometimes you need a little bit of time to warm up. And so with Sharpie, one of the things I want to point out is even the slightest like quarter of a second hesitation is going to give you a little dot at the beginning of your lines. And so this is why this pen is not one that I use for hatching very much, but it's good to kind of get a feel for that. Yeah, see, they have dots. Okay, so now I'm going to do a little bit also with ballpoint pen. This ballpoint pen is a little dry. Okay, I always have scratch paper near me when I'm hatching. Okay, and so I'm dragging my hand, so I'm getting a little bit of variation. So I'm gonna get a little more going. Okay, now if I want to do cross hatching, instead of trying to hatch in a different direction, what I do is I just turn my paper. There's one direction that you hatch that always feels the most comfortable. And so you want to practice until you can get lots of straight parallel lines going the same direction. Once you have that kind of feel where I'm like keeping my whole arm stiff and doing the motion, then I'm going to come over here and work on my practice sheet. Okay, now if this is the direction of the hatching lines I'm going to make, I'm going to turn my paper so that it is comfortable for that direction. So with my scratch paper, I'm going to look at it and be like, okay, so I want to probably turn my paper about like that for my comfortable hatch lines. Now, it is super important to keep your lines in the box because part of what we're practicing doing is getting our lines to be the places we want them to be. Okay, so I'm going to come over here and I'm going to exhale and be focused and stiff and keep my arm stiff. Now, the other thing I'm doing is I'm making a gradient. So I want this to be darkest here and I want it to fade lighter there. So as I go in this direction, I'm going to space my lines out. And I'm going to continuously keep going and overlapping. Now for me, the more I talk, the more my lines lack parallel areas. Okay, so I'm going to work from the other direction. And I want to be thinking about that gradient that I want to make. And I'm going slower, shorter lines, and more careful as I get near the edge. And you want to keep this neat. So places I want more overlapping will be the places that are going to be darker. So you want to plan ahead, think about that, and make sure that you're building up more dark lines. Now, one of the things you don't want to do is go with your pen and just scribble color that in, because it's going to have a different feel and a different look than if you do it with the hatching lines. And you can see marker builds up really quickly. And so you're going to be able to get those dark gradients pretty quickly with marker. And you keep building them up. So I'll do layers and layers of short lines here. Being careful to use my whole arm for the movement so they're not getting out of parallel, and so that I'm not getting obviously inconsistent marks or lines. So remember to squeeze that pen with your hand and keep your wrist still, because if you don't, you end up with lines that are all over the place. So I would keep going until I have developed my gradient so that it's just the same. And you can see a little bit of messy edges. If that's something that bothers you, you can get a little piece of tape to put near one of the edges so that everything stays where it's supposed to go. Okay, this is kind of a lazy move, but at the same time, it works, so why not do it? But it will give me a hard edge. And so I also want to be careful about peeling it off, that you don't rip the paper, which it looks like I might be doing because I pushed it down too hard and didn't detack my tape. So I'm going to peel it off nice and slow. So I don't rip my paper. Or at least so that I only rip it a tiny bit. Okay, so that's how you would approach the first one, and you keep building it up so that it's well developed. Okay, next, cross hatching with ballpoint pen is going to be the same exact idea, but I'm going to rotate my paper. Now, a ballpoint pen, we remember from over here, is definitely lighter, right? Here's our ballpoint pen, here's our marker. Okay, and here's our Sharpie, and we can see the ballpoint pen is the lightest. So I'm going to need to use a lot of layers, which you can see here. This shading has probably 6 different layers or more, but they're all parallel in the direction that they're going. Okay, so I would come over here and I would start building up my first layer all in one direction, keeping that wrist stiff so that everything looks the way we want it to look. Okay, and then for each layer that I'm building, I'm just going to turn my paper. Now, the good thing about ballpoint pens is they don't leave that dot, right? The dot when you set the pen down on the page. Ballpoint pens work because the little ball that's inside the pen rotates and gets ink on itself. Okay, so just whatever you're doing with this pen, make sure that it's sets of lines that are all going in the same direction as each other. And you will find really fast that like there's one direction of moving your hand that feels more comfortable for you. And so once you find that direction, oh, that one was not parallel because I'm talking. Once you find that comfortable position, you keep your arm and hand in the same position and you move the paper. Okay, so I'm gonna keep going with this until I start establishing my faded dark to light, because that's what I need. The other thing I do is I space the lines further apart as I get further out. See, talking. This is definitely one of those projects where being silent is hugely helpful. You're going to be looking for getting into that flow state where you're really focused. And so throwing in those headphones, putting on your favorite music is a fantastic idea. And you can do 10 different directions with your lines here. You just want to make sure that anything that's in a specific direction stays parallel. And I will keep going and overlapping that until it gets really dark near this edge. Now, the one that is really one that people make mistakes with a lot is stippling.